We're expecting this. Okay. Good evening and welcome. I'm Jean McKnight, co-chair of this Housing Plan Working Group. This open meeting of the Needham Housing Plan Working Group is being conducted remotely, consistent with current state regulations, and is being recorded. Public access to this meeting is provided via Zoom, but this meeting will not have public comment. First, we'll confirm that a quorum of the members of the Housing Plan Working Group are present. When I call your name and mention your affiliation, please respond in the affirmative. And I am co-chair, but the next person I'll introduce is the other co-chair, and that is Natasha Espada, who is a member of our planning board. Can we hear you say I'm here or something?
I'm here. I wasn't sure if you were introducing me so well. Yes, I'm Natasha Espada, the co-chair.
Yes, just want people to say
I'm
something.
here.
Say something that listeners can hear them say. And then we have Emily Cooper, who is a citizen at large. Good.
Here.
Ed Cosgrove, who's with our Board of Health.
Here.
Heidi Frail, a member of our Select Board.
Here.
Helen Gregory, who is on the Council on Aging.
Here.
Oscar Mertz, a citizen at large.
Present.
Michael O'Brien, who's on the school committee.
Here.
And Rhonda Spector, who is a citizen at large.
Here.
And we may have Ed Scheidler joining us, who's on the Housing Authority. The first thing I want to mention is our schedule. At this meeting tonight, we had intended to present the final guidelines to be issued by the Massachusetts Department of Housing and Community Development to implement the new MBTA communities law. And the zoning subgroup might have presented changes to the proposed rezoning recommendations that the subgroup presented at our June 9th meeting, based on whatever the changes were in the guidelines. But the final guidelines have not yet been issued. So rather than scheduling an extra meeting in August to review and respond to the final guidelines, we propose to extend our meeting schedule by 1 month into November, as shown on the revised schedule that was sent out this week. So we'll meet on September 8th as scheduled, but the agenda will be the MBTA guidelines review and review of final subgroup reports with priorities and strategies that will inform staff in preparing the draft housing plan. And so to prepare for that September 8th meeting, a deadline of August 17 is proposed as the deadline for each subgroup to present its final report. This deadline assumes that by mid-August, the final MBTA communities law guidelines will have been issued. And the zoning subgroups report that presented on June 9th will likely be revised. Oh, thank you, Alex, for putting that up. This is the proposed schedule. The zoning subgroup report that was presented on June 9th will likely be revised in response to the final guidelines, and perhaps the capacity building and housing development and preservation support subgroup reports will also. Then the draft plan will be presented to us by Karen Sunderborg at our previously suggested September 29th meeting. That was originally going to be our community meeting, but that will be the time when the draft plan is presented to us at the end of September for discussion and feedback, or else back to Karen any changes we want to see in the draft that she has drafted at that stage. Thus, our presentation to the community of the draft plan will be at our October 13th meeting rather than September 9th, as it was originally scheduled. And we'll need one more meeting in November to respond to community meeting comments so that staff can make whatever revisions are needed and present the proposed final plan to the group on that at that November date, November. So with Thanksgiving being November 24th, we propose a Thursday, November 17th. The date isn't on this list, but because we want to talk about it. And we hope that the 17th will work for everyone, because November 3rd or 10th present difficult meeting conflicts for some of us. And November 17th will give staff more time to work on the final plan. So do you think that the September 17th meeting, maybe I tell you what we'll do, think about it, check your calendars if you can. And at the end of the meeting, Lee Newman will discuss the schedule again and get our feedback on that date. That gives you time to think about it. And so now I'm turning to the minutes of our June 9th, 2022 meeting, which were prepared by Karen Sunderborg. And does anyone have any comments or any questions or edits to suggest on these minutes? Okay, then if they seem satisfactory, and they do to me for sure, may I have a motion to accept the minutes of the June 9, 2022 Housing Plan Working Group meeting?
Motion to accept the minutes.
And second?
Second.
Second from Helen Gregory, motion on the motion made by Dr. Mertz. So now I'll call for a roll call vote, and I'll just go around the screen as I see it. Helen Gregory,
Yes.
Oscar Mertz,
Yes.
Ed Cosgrove,
Yes.
Heidi Frail,
Yes.
Rhonda Spector,
Yes.
Emily Cooper,
Yes.
Natasha Espada,
Yes.
Michael O'Brien.
Yes.
And I know I did the same thing last meeting, and that is neglecting to introduce our staff so the public knows who our staff is who are here with us. And Karen Sunderborg is our primary staff person on this housing plan effort, and Karen is the town's community housing specialist.
Here.
And Lee Newman is our planning director,
Here.
and Alexandra Klee is our assistant planner.
Hi. Here.
Okay, good. And I should say, as each agenda item is reached, I'll introduce the participants that are here to present the projects and proposals. And I should say, for those participating in the meeting, please be aware that others are able to see and hear you, and anything you share or state will be a matter of public record. Because most of us already serve on town boards. We're well aware of that by now with Zoom, but I always say it. But I do want to let the public know that all supporting materials for this meeting, including the agenda, are available on the town's website, www.needhamma.gov/housing plan 2021. And so the ground rules for this meeting are designed to allow for an accurate public record. Each of the speakers on our agenda will be introduced. After speakers conclude their remarks, each working group member will be asked by name for any comment, questions, or motions. And I doubt if we'll be taking any votes tonight other than the minutes vote, but if we do take votes, that will be by roll call. Now, members of the public who wish to submit written comments to this working group would send them to planning@needhamma.gov with a subject line, housing plan working group. So I think I've taken care of all the preliminaries now, including the minutes. And at this point, let me just to notes here. So next, we turn to Natasha Espada for a presentation of the background information on housing production goals that was prepared by Karen Sunderborg, focusing on unmet housing needs in Needham.
And maybe Karen, do you want to set it up a little bit while I'm putting it up? About what you sent to everyone, or do you want me to do it?
Yeah. So a couple meetings ago, we went through what we called guiding principles, more qualitative goals that on where the town wants to get to on its housing agenda. These goals were included at the end of the housing needs assessment under the priority housing needs section. And it was the first step of looking at the range of housing needs and coming up with a summary distribution of goals, percentages of units to be produced, whether they be renters or for ownership, and based on number of bedrooms to have some correlation to types of target populations. So we put together, and Natasha is going to go through it, kind of a table, a matrix, and we wanted to make sure that the working group had a chance to weigh in on that distribution of quantitative housing production goals over the term of the housing plan. We didn't include numbers, we included a percentage distribution. And we also, in the background information you received one piece that gets into some of the nitty-gritty of the data that was simulated to come up with what priority housing needs. And the table that Natasha is briefly going to go over that really relies on cost burdens by types of households, by income ranges, and really looking at where the significant unmet needs are, that providing some context for your consideration when you review this table on quantitative housing production goals.
Thanks, Karen. I think that's really helpful. So all of you should have received this in your packet. I'm not sure who has been able to go through it or not, but just the biggest thing is we're going to look at two tables based on the latest version of the housing needs assessment. And as Karen mentioned, the first table summarizes the cost burdens across income levels, tenure, and types of households. And the second table, it will be the distribution of production goals. And the whole point of this is to be able to determine, so there's one table here, and there's another table here. And what we're going to do, big picture here, is determine, this is the first draft, determine the types of tenure, rental ownership or special needs, and the percentages that we would be proposing based on the information that we have. So this is the summary of priority housing needs and estimated development goals, a first draft of it. We need to come up with what these percentages should be based on the different types of tenure. And so we will get to that once we go through the information that Karen was able to put together.
Natasha,
so-
would it be possible to make it a little bit bigger
Yes.
or to send it out again? Thanks.
Okay. So table 3 or -43 is the unmet housing needs. It's the context of distribution of needs to inform the development goals. So this is just, the first two tables are information for us to be able to use to make the goals. Is that better, Emily? Okay. So this is the income levels and these are the target populations. So this piece here is the rentals. And in a second, we'll talk about owners by income levels. So let's do one at a time, just because there's a lot of really good information here. So the target population, there's the extremely low income within 30% AMI. And for those of you that I'm sure everybody knows it, but I had to remind myself that it's area median income. Very low income, 30% to 50% AMI, low to moderate income, 58 to 80% AMI. And then there's a subtotal, and then there's the above that, the 80% to 100 and above 100%. So then the extremely low income, there are 450 units. Market affordable units are 205. Unmet needs, 245 or 54% of the units have 30% or more of income, spend 30% or more of income on housing. And 215 have severe burdens, which they spend 50% or more of their income on housing. For the very low income, 30 to 50% AMI, there are 405 units, 150 are affordable, and 255. So this is what the top means versus the bottom is 30% or more of their income on housing, and 170 have the severe burdens of 50% or more income. The low to moderate income, 50 to 80% AMI, there are 175 units, 55 are market affordable units, and the unmet need is 120 or 30% or more of income on housing, and there are none with severe burdens. And then when you get to 80% to 100% and above 100%, you have 205 at 80 to 100, 145 market affordable, 60 have 30% or more of income on houses, spend 35% with severe burdens. And at above 100% AMI, 575 units, 515 are market affordable units, 60, 30% or more of income on housing spend, and 30 with severe burdens. So the total is 1,810 all units. There are 1,070 are market affordable. 740 people spend 30% or more of their income on housing, and 460 or 25% of those with severe burdens. So this is just the rentals right now. And I'm going to go through the ownership in the same way. And I know it's a lot of information, but I just want to go through it. And then we can basically, let me see if I can get the totals. Well, the totals are there. Then we can kind of discuss, let's go through the two tables. It's a lot of information, but let's go through it, see if anyone has any questions, because this is what's going to give us information to determine what our goals are going to be. For ownership, extremely low income within 30% AMI, there are 330 units, 10 of them are market affordable units, and 320 of the 330 people spend 30% or more of income on housing, and 305 have severe burdens. For the very low income, 30 to 50% AMI, there are 220 units, 37 of them affordable, 183 have 30% or more of income on housing, and 58 have severe burdens. In the low to moderate income, 50 to 80% AMI, there are 510 units, 305 are affordable, 205 have 30% or more of their income on, spend 30% or more of their income on housing, and 125 have severe burdens. So the subtotal of this group is 1,060, 352 are affordable. So 708 spend 30 or more of their income on housing, and 488 have severe burdens. Between the 80 to 100 AMI and above 100 AMI, there's 80 to 100 AMI is 375, 195 affordable, 180 of 30% or more of their income on housing, and 100 with severe burdens. And above 100% AMI, the 7520, 77,520, 5,672 are affordable, 1,848 have 30% or more of the income on, spend 30% or more income on housing, and then 115 have severe burdens. So in total for ownership, there's 10,765, 8,177 are affordable. Out of those, 2,588 spend more than 30%, and 1,163 have severe burdens. So those are the two differences in ownership. So there's 1810 rentals, 10,765 ownership. Out of the rentals, market affordable units are 1,070. And out of the ownership, 5,672. So this is one piece. The second piece is the type of households. So I don't know if people have questions about the first piece, which is the information on income levels.
I do.
Unmet housing needs.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I don't understand the two columns. I'm sorry. What does it mean market affordable? There are 1,070 affordable rental units in Needham?
So that's what I'm understanding, that there's all the units are 1,810 and the market affordable 1,070. Is that correct, Karen?
We're trying to use the definition that Dan Matthews mentioned early in our process. I'm on mute. How do I, okay, here we go.
No, we can hear you.
No, we can hear you.
So market affordable means without cost burdens. In other words, they're not spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs.
So there's 1,810 apartments in Needham. Is that what it's saying?
There are 1,810 renter households.
In all of Needham, and
In all
of
of
those, 1,070 are not cost burdened.
Right.
Okay.
Meaning, does that mean that they're not designated for, you're saying those are what Dan was saying was they're in the general market, they're not NHA, they're not 40B, they're not, so they're, is that what you mean? These are in the market?
My understanding, these aren't units, these are households. I think there's a misnomer if I'm
There
understanding.
is households, but households generally translates into units because there are no real vacancy rates.
Right. But so
Yeah,
what we're
so
saying is
It's roughly
that
the same.
it's all, there are 1,810 renter households
Mm-hmm.
in Needham. So it's all renter households, not all units.
Right.
And then,
Yeah.
because a unit implies something a little bit different. Then over on the next column, of those 1,810 renter households, 1,070 can afford their rent without being rent burdened.
Right.
What we're saying.
So
Right.
that makes sense. How is it that there are,
So
I
the
mean-
market affordable is a misnomer. That's not,
That's
right?
No, it should say, Oscar makes a good point. It should say market affordable or some of the SHI units. I mean, not all
Somehow or
the
another, they
SHI
can
units
afford,
are-
somehow or another, they can afford their rent. Either there's a subsidy
That's right. That's
or
right.
they have money, but
got it.
these
Or maybe
folks
just
are
say
not,
without cost burdens.
right. These renter households do not have any cost burdens.
Right.
So what's left is all these remainder households between, the 740, where they're renting and
This-
experiencing some sort of cost.
But you
burden.
can't say that either, I don't think. And now it's confusing again. I think you have to say that it's market affordable or
Or
SHI
subsidized, yeah.
or subsidized, right?
Or subsidized is probably a better
Right.
word.
But I don't think I don't think we need to say even market affordable subsidized. What we're saying is they're households who are
Right.
affording their
Without
rent.
cost burdens.
Without
Right,
cost
right.
burdens. It doesn't make a
yeah,
difference
I think
where
the
they
market
live.
affordable is very confusing.
Yes. So it's all the households and some have cost burdens and of the total.
Okay,
Right.
so the other question I have is when somebody is extremely low income, under 30%, so we have 450 units or households that are that. Aren't those people are typically only paying 30% of their income. So how could they be burdened?
Not
They're
all
right.
of these units are, the unmet.
They're not
needs
affordable units.
Are subsidized.
They're just living in a rental unit. They're paying $1,000 a month and they only have $2,000 a month and they're just figuring out how to make it work.
So
These are not, they're not.
you think
deed restricted,
you
they're
think
not
there are that
subsidized.
many units in Needham that are $800 a month?
not units, people,
People.
right? So,
Yeah, I mean,
So confused.
units
but
so
okay.
they're
and
800,
households
they're
are about
800.
the same because there's no real vacancy, there's not a lot of vacancy, right? There's no.
So let's pretend I have a friend, she lives, she's a single mom, she lives with her daughter, they're renting. She is probably spending 50% of her income towards rent. She probably is in the above 100% AMI category, but she's cost burdened. I mean, she's spending much more of her income towards rent because she can't find an affordable rental.
No, that part I get. It's the extremely low income within 30% of AMI.
If I would offer,
I don't get it.
I've been assuming, and Karen can tell me if I'm wrong, that those who are without cost burden are probably at that income level living in public housing
Yes,
or living in 40B units that are, but
Section
no,
8.
they're probably not even living in 40B units because those are geared to the households that are below 80%. So they're probably living in our public housing. Am I far wrong on that, Karen?
No, that's probably the reason.
First three
Yes.
categories, probably.
So
well,
so the only
first two.
question I have with that makes perfect sense, Jean. But I don't understand how there would be 205 of them that are cost burden, because if they're living in housing where they're at 30% of AMI, are
Well,
they
that's
in-
their income is
so
the,
they're not actually in units that are
Right.
affordable.
Not in, they're in the 245 people over on the unmet need
right here.
have limited incomes and they're spending too much of it on their housing
So
wherever they're
they're so
renting,
even
and
though
they're
they're in
not,
public housing,
I mean-
they're not subsidized enough.
I mean,
They're
not
not
a-
in subsidized housing.
technically they could be, because you can, I mean, Rhonda, you and I, actually you can, be on a Section 8 voucher and you can spend up to 60% of your income on rent. So there's a little bit of
Okay.
nuance in there, but
Okay, great.
215 households have severe cost burdens,
Got
and spending over half their income.
I
Those
do
are
not know
unlikely
where they are,
subsidized.
right? We don't know where they are. I mean,
No,
and
we
how they're
don't know
making
where
it
they
work.
are.
And we don't know how they're making it work. I mean, they are
They're
in trouble.
struggling.
They're in trouble.
So what you're saying is even if they are so technically supposed to qualify for spending only 30%,
They may
some
be
people
doing-
are in getting Section 8 vouchers or living in need housing, and they are actually not conforming
I
to
don't think that's the most
qualifications.
of it. I think, I mean, so we've got about 215 with severe burdens. Those are probably people who are living in the community, no subsidy, no nothing, and just
Right.
getting by,
Right.
right? And they have very limited income. Maybe they're renting a room in a house.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay,
I don't know. I don't know where they are, but I'm worried about it.
Yeah.
I think you see from this table that the greatest need are for those earning at or below 50% of area median income, with 250 households here and 180 households here with severe cost burdens. Those should be real targets. They're living in the community and they're struggling.
It's fascinating that 50 to 80 that none of them have severe.
Yeah, that's unusual.
Okay. Thank you. I understand now. Thank you.
That's why we're going through it one by one. Let me see if,
Yeah.
because we're trying to, because there's so much information and Karen is trying to distill it in a way that can help us make these decisions. And so that's why we need to ask questions and, so so the outcome here is that this one has from very low income, you have a lot of people with severe burdens in comparison to others. And so then the ownership, you have actually above the 100% AMI. You have a lot of ownership, but again, it's burdened. Which one was the highest one here? Was it the extremely low
Extremely
income?
low income.
Right?
owners.
Makes sense, because those are seniors
Yeah.
who are on
Yeah.
fixed
But-
incomes,
They're
who
on
live in their
fixed income.
asset and
Yeah.
they can't sell it and they can't go anywhere.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
So then this is the first spreadsheet. And then the second one is this one, the types of households. So here the target population in need are their seniors, families, and non-elderly individuals. And out of the total, this is, so on here it says total all units occupied by those earning less than 80% AMI. Housing available that is affordable to those earning less than 80% AMI without cost burden. And all those with cost burdens, unmet needs occupied by those earning less than 80% AMI, spending more than 30% with cost burdens. So out of all the units, there's 570 renters and 715 owners for the seniors. 340 of the renters have cost burdens and 489 of the owners. And am I reading this correctly?
Yes.
Okay. The families, 225 renters, 90 of them have cost burdens, and the 300 owners for the families, 190 have cost burdens. And then for the non-elderly individuals, there are 235 renters. 190 of them have cost burdens, and the 45 owners, 29 of them have cost burdens. So any questions on this chart?
Can I?
It would be interesting if we could, what about 62 and over? And it'd be curious if 75 and over. for
They don't
seniors.
break the data down that way.
Yeah.
This data is all from raw data that you need to kind of collect, and then there's a kind of a way of aggregating them. So this is unaggregated data that's put together. It's only 62 and over is the senior breakdown. They do
So
break down families, small families versus large families, but this is kind of it.
And this is, again, probably likely to be a lot of people who are in either 40B or in the NHA subsidized housing, but not necessarily, we don't have an idea of which.
We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't know.
Right.
Mhm.
So from
So
this, go ahead.
I want to mention that in the materials that was sent to you was also the draft section, Roman number 3C7 of the housing plan that Karen prepared. I think it's 14 pages. So I must admit I haven't finished reading it all myself, but it explains all this in a narrative form that gives good background on these issues and on this data. So I recommend, if you haven't had a chance to read that yet, that it's worth.
Yeah, and let me just mention, we did one of the meetings that talked about various considerations on priority housing needs and renter versus ownership. And one of the consideration was that almost all state subsidies are targeted to renters. So as a result, it's very hard to get to any real scale on ownership unless you do a 40B. The only subsidy that's really available is CPA. And given high land costs, and the subsidy becomes per unit becomes large. So that's why, that's another consideration. We get past this table, we get into the next table. There are other considerations for breaking down tenure and unit sizes and that type of thing.
And so I just want to, because Karen had done a really good summary of this on this table here. I just want to remind everyone what Karen, what you had said here. Seniors comprise the greatest number of households with incomes at or below 80% AMI, including renters and homeowners, compared to families and single individuals under age 62. This is not surprising given the number of seniors who are retired and living on fixed incomes, also reflected in lower median household incomes. In regard to families in this income range, there were also more owners with incomes at or below 80% AMI at 300 owners compared to 215 renter households. Owner households also were experiencing a higher proportion of unmet housing needs at 63.3% compared to 40% for renters. There were many more non-elderly, non-family households, mainly single individuals who were renting as opposed to owning their home at 235 to 45 households respectively. Renters also had a higher level of unmet housing need at 80.8 versus 64.4 for owners, or 29 owner households. And so she said what is compelling about this documentation is the very high level of unmet housing need for those with incomes or at below 80% AMI level. Within these limited incomes, many residents are struggling to remain in the community, some likely having to decide whether they pay their rent or mortgage versus utility bills, medical prescriptions, or food. And then when we looked at this one over here, the text that she has here, that it presents targeted affordable housing development goals based on priority housing needs over the short and longer term. The table also projects a distribution of production goals by type of household with a further breakdown by tenure. So the distribution of housing goals suggests that there'd be an 80% to 20% split between rental and ownership. These priorities also address another priority housing need related to providing barrier-free units and supportive services where feasible, representing at least 20% of the 1-bedroom units and 10% of the 2- and 3-bedroom units. So we're going to see that in a second. It should be noted that the state subsidizing agencies have entered into an interagency agreement that provides more guidance to localities concerning housing opportunities for families with children and are requiring at least 10% of the units in affordable production developments that are funded, assisted, or approved by a state housing agency have 3 or more bedrooms with some exceptions. So what Karen has done here is this is exactly what I just mentioned is the summary of priority housing needs and estimated development goals. This is the first draft. And so we want feedback from everyone. So type of tenure, rental, ownership, or special needs. So what Karen, from all that information, as I just mentioned, she's proposing 80% rental units and 20% ownership units. And then the special need units are per the type of tenure. So you have single persons, 1-bedroom units. This 80% of rental units would be divided into 40% single persons, 1 bedroom, 50% small families, 2-bedroom, and large families, 3+ bedrooms is 10%. And the proposed ownership units is 25%, is 20% of the total. 25% are for single persons, 50 for 2 families, and 25 for large families. So, and then the special needs, 20% of total rental and owner units. So 100%, 20% out of the 100%. Need to be universally accessible or supported for single persons, 10% for small families, 2 bedrooms, and 10% for large families, 2 bedrooms. So this is really where all that information is coming to, is a draft of these percentages that we need to talk about and hear from you tonight to make sure that you're on board with what Karen is proposing. Karen, did I explain that correctly?
Yes.
Natasha, can we just, I'm a little confused by the special needs row. So
Mhm.
special needs includes any housing that is accessible or any housing, like, what about a group home? Like, is that it, or group living for people who are young disabled? Like, so
Emily, Emily, I was interpreting it like maybe the word families is getting us in trouble here, because when we say small families and large families, maybe we should. So that was my thinking.
So let me just give this, the asterisk means include seniors. So single persons, including seniors, right? That's whatever star or whatever. This includes couples who are seniors as well. So I guess the question is,
Yeah, the 20%
confusing?
is of all the all the 1-bedroom units that are produced, that are largely targeted to single persons, individuals and seniors. 20% of the units would be universally accessible or have supportive services.
So you're sort of lumping together. So if it's a senior
Oh,
property,
Yes.
it could be both. They could
Yeah,
be. So if you get money from the state, for example, they require now senior housing be accessible and have support services.
Right.
You could
So this-
also do, I'm going to do a special needs housing for, 20-something-year-olds on the autism spectrum disorder that isn't accessible, but it's supported with support. That would fit there too.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
So it's geared to kind of the smaller units versus the larger units. And we probably should, I think we've said in the plan at least 20%. Because if we could get more than that, that would be good, right? And then 10% for family developments.
so,
And I have a question, Natasha, if I may
Yes.
ask Karen, just to clarify, I assume that when we look to future development and we are looking at needs for 1-bedroom units and 2-bedroom units, the type of development we're talking about is our multifamily condominium in the ownership column. Is that correct?
Or multifamily rental.
Oh, I know rental, but I mean in the ownership column. And when we
You'd have
talk
to have
about
multifamily. Yeah, you'd
ownership
have to be able to have multifamily. Yeah.
units, 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom units would be condominium.
Largely
Well,
condominium.
it could be an ADU or it could be multifamily.
Well, that would be rental, wouldn't it?
No, I mean, there are multifamily condos.
She's
Oh,
asking if
no,
it's
I mean
multifamily.
ADUs,
think-
ADUs.
Most of the condos
Right.
would be multifamily, but
Yeah.
there would be potentially other, exceptions to that.
Yeah.
Converting a 2-family to 2 condominiums, or maybe, a small little townhouse cluster, or, I mean, there are other considerations, although they would be on a smaller scale.
Mhm. Okay, but I just wanted to throw out the assumption that the 1 and 2 family ownership units would most likely be in a multifamily condominium building, that's all.
I guess I have a question on that, Jean, because I think that's a really good point. This is just saying 1-bedroom units, but it doesn't necessarily say what type of units. Would we have a goal of the types of units in addition to saying 1-bedroom units, or is that too specific and that's based on zoning?
That's a question for Karen.
Yeah,
I think
or
it's
for
a
anyone.
question for the group. Does the group want to dig further and try to figure out how to layer types of units on it? I mean,
Well, there are models for very small houses, little bungalows in a,
Right. Right.
in a cluster.
Right.
But that seems rather unlikely to happen in Needham as compared with multifamily condominium. Not, if a developer came along, I suppose we'd talk about it and consider it, but it seems unlikely. Another form of housing, there was a feature in the Globe this week about manufactured home developments. And that's really a combination of rental and ownership, because people typically own their manufactured home on a lot that's rented from the mobile home park owner. So there are other possibilities, but that's getting into rather unexpected, unlikely possibilities for Needham.
Well, I think the co-housing is another type of housing that may or may not have a lot of leg, because it's usually younger people, but it could potentially be a way to solve, because you can get smaller units because you're sharing kitchens and
dorm?
sharing. Yeah, but I mean, it's
Yeah,
definitely
it's
going to
pretty
be
cool.
coming. It's going to be a good way to solve some of these cost burden issues, because people may be able to rent a much smaller unit, but then have shared service, shared space for all their needs. So that could be good for young people, for people with special needs, and even for seniors, or for anyone.
I guess
But-
my question, and I don't know if this, I probably, that this includes, I just want to make sure with Karen, this includes all of the Needham Housing Authority units, right?
no, this is all based on new development.
No, I know, but the information we have here.
Yes.
is based on, so.
Yes.
if we want-
Merged.
Yes.
Right, but some of the Needham Housing Authority, like the ones by High Rock, are probably going to be redeveloped at some point, right?
Right, and they'll be most likely to be rental, but we don't know at what size or income group or target population or anything like that.
Well, I guess what I'm wondering, and I'm just throwing this out there because I don't know, I've never done this particular, this before, is for those areas where we want more density, those are like single story pieces. If we have these goals and that's a perfect target for something to be developed, would the zoning for that area or the goals that we have here can they be more specific to make sure that there's more density to allow for more units, right? And to create a different type of opportunity. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. Is that something that?
You're talking about NHA property?
Yeah, I think I can answer that question with regard to the High Rock area. It is presently zoned to allow for a two-family kind of, and it could be a two-family townhouse, because the development that occurred about 15 years ago, at that time, where the single-family bungalows were converted to two-family townhouses, the zoning was changed at that time to allow the two families. But that's as far as it went, just to allow two-family homes on separate lots.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna get into this when we get into the strategies and the actions. And under the
Okay.
actions, that's where we can address the kind of the permitting and the possibilities, et cetera.
Yeah, because especially with the MBTA communities, right? That's probably in a location that's near that area. So how do we maximize that? Okay, so these are goals versus the strategies. I just want to make sure that everyone understands like what our task is to make sure that we either agree with these goals or that we talk about how to change them to be the goals that the whole group agrees on.
So is it, would there be another, sorry, it's a little loud.
Can everyone
be-
who is not speaking mute? It's getting very hard to hear over the background noise.
That's exactly right.
Yes, can everyone mute? Thank you.
Is it, will we have another, is there another table underneath this where it talks about the types of, like, it's not just rental, but is it senior or is it, because I think it's hard from, I'm fine with the 80-20% split and it bodes well, but I think it's really going to be the devil's in the details of who it's for, who it's targeted to, what income level and what population, because I think that's what the tables before were so telling about. So I think this is a first step, which is good. Do we want to do rental? Do we want to do owner and how much? But then I think there's the next step of and for whom at what level.
Sort
Under
of,
single persons, that includes, if you look at the asterisks, includes seniors. And then under small family includes seniors who are couples.
Sure, but it doesn't
Senior person
exclusively
Nola,
include, I mean, it's not, you know, it doesn't exclusively include seniors. So we have,
to be single
300
individuals too.
right, we have 340 renters who are under 80% AMI, who are cost burden right now, who are seniors, right? You could say, someone could make the case that all of those units should be for seniors. And that all of the rental units should be for seniors, given this level of need. One could say that. I'm not saying that we are saying that, but I'm just saying it doesn't, and it doesn't talk about what income level they're at. So I think we should probably ground around how much rental we want and how much home ownership we want. And then I think there's further conversations about the income targeting and the populations.
so are you specifically saying, Emily, like, are we looking for 40B projects where 25% are for 80, or are we really looking for tax credit projects with vouchers so that more people can be met?
I think that's the question. I mean, I think, for
Yeah.
example, our subgroup had a lot of questions about the Needham Housing Authority plans, which don't specifically say what income the properties will be for. It could be 80%, it could be 60, it could be 30%. So the buildings that are going to be built, what income level are they for? Will they be for seniors? Will they be for people who are disabled and younger? I mean, I think people will be, I think we heard a lot from CPAC, and I think it's important that we break out also a little bit more about people with disabilities, specifically that are younger. I know we kind of put them in the special needs category, but we might also want to talk about development for different populations in that way.
So will this happen when we do strategies, Karen, or is this the time to do this?
I think it'd be great if someone can if you want to get down into that level, and certainly, dividing into target further into target populations and incomes, maybe you want to take a stab at that. Maybe the development subgroup.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
Can I just ask,
I could like fool around with
I
it.
just have,
but-
I have one question.
Go ahead, Oscar.
Thank you. I just wanted to check with Karen on if I want to go back to the assumptions for the proposed as 80% rental, 20% owner. This is your rationale for that percentage was to skew it to the rental because there's greater opportunity for subsidy for and loan or subsidy or funding for rental versus ownership.
That
But
was
this is
one,
right.
one consideration.
Okay. What I'm wondering is this all, because if that's completely opposite to what we would be producing in this town, most of the units that are produced in town are owner and a small percentage are renter, right? So if you're saying this is the target for all new development, you're saying flip the script across the entire spectrum of housing from 30% AMI to complete market, high-end stuff, whatever
Yeah.
we're doing to replace new single-family homes, everything. You're saying this should be across the board, the percentages for all the housing types.
Yeah.
So I think that's something to think, I think we need to break that down a little bit more, just so we understand what and I guess this gets back to another question, which was, this is straight up percentages only. It's not target actual numbers of units to be created over a period of time, whatever that is, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I don't even know if we can get to actual target numbers coming out of the census data. Can we figure out what we know there's 75 to 80 teardowns a year on, that was the pace. So there's,
Well, one
So
way to
this-
do it would be maybe to look at if, because the SHI includes market units, if you take out the market units and you get to 10% based on actual affordable, the gap is about 450 units.
Right.
Mhm.
And that
I
might be the starting place.
That would be the numerical goal. And then you're
It's just one way of calculating.
one way of counting, and then you
I
take the 80% or the 20% or the 10% of that. How about the charts that you presented earlier, Natasha,
Mhm.
that have to do with people who are burdened? Do those suggest numbers of units for goals that come out of those charts?
so I think we also have to keep in mind that let's say the 489 owners that are seniors and maybe the 190 owners, if we gave them a rental option that was affordable, then
Sure.
they might sell their house.
right,
and
there's a
that
lot
would
of
create-
dynamic here,
Right,
right?
that would create an opportunity for somebody else to buy that house, right? And it would be affordable to them. So I think there's, it's not a static thing.
Right.
Mhm.
When you're thinking about the numbers, we don't have to go create 340 plus 90 plus 190 rental units, or conversely, that many home ownership opportunities, because the market will, people, if you're presented with a rental opportunity, you might no longer choose to own.
Mhm.
Yeah, and some
these-
communities are considering deeper tax relief for
Seniors.
more homeowners who are really having cost burdens, severe cost burdens.
Are these homeowners, if these homeowners, if you made rental opportunities for these homeowners, would these homes, and apologies if I'm not understanding, could these homes be homes that go on the market for anyone to purchase, or would it be specifically for affordable housing?
On the market.
Yeah.
So that could
They
mean
would
that
just
that
go
could
on the
become a
market.
McMansion, that could become a McMansion?
It could be, it depends what we've put in place for our zoning and for
Yeah,
our.
right.
So I
for
think
our
that's
there's
pretty
so many-
critical,
yeah.
because if we're
requirements.
gonna use ownership, if we're gonna lose ownership for people that cannot afford to live in Needham, and then we're providing, then we're gonna have less ownership opportunities because we're allowing other people to buy it, tear it down, and build a house that's
Well,
completely unaffordable.
It's
So
a
I
very
think-
dynamic situation, right?
I think at least in our subgroup, we tried to we did talk about the tear down issue at one end of the spectrum and ways to kind of think about that, which is also kind of radical. And then we also talked about the affordability at the other side. I mean, I think you need to do both. I think you to make it work, but I think they're all, as Oscar said, I mean, we're literally turning it would be a big systems change, and all of this has to get past town meeting.
Okay, and I want to suggest that the subgroups have work to do and coming up with the reports that would be informed by this information. And that it may, if going to present the housing plan implementation roadmap, we have to move on in our agenda to that.
Yep.
And
So I think I can
I-
send this with these notes. You already have this, but I can send this to Lee and Alex and they can circulate it, or I can send it to the whole group, however you want me to do that. So because I've actually made some notes so that I could understand it better. So it has this piece in it, and I'm not sure if that's helpful for others. We changed a couple of these things so that I could really understand it. So I'll send it out if anyone wants to use it or not.
Yes, thank you. I think, as you said, I think it's time to move on so we can come back to this after we've talked about a lot of other stuff, and then we'll probably have more knowledge to bring to bear.
In transitioning, I want to mention something. Today's News You Need 'em email, I don't know if you all get that, but the report today was on the recent community housing survey. And that shows that overall affordability is a growing concern for Needham residents. Fewer than 2 in 10 participants in this survey. And this was done very carefully according to proper survey methods. But 2 in 10 participants, these are Needham residents, 2 in 10 gave positive marks to availability of affordable housing. So our townspeople really recognize that we have a problem here. And I encourage you to read the survey report. It has some other interesting data. So as we all know, housing affordability is a problem throughout Greater Boston, and the MBTA communities law presents a challenge to our town and to all cities and towns to address the housing crisis. But this information that was just presented tonight about the housing needs in our own community is very important to focus on and recognize that we have a problem right here in our town. Next on our agenda, I'll present a draft housing plan implementation roadmap that was prepared by Oscar Mertz with edits by me and was emailed to you only yesterday, I realize. And this is a draft, and we seek your response. We tried to list every strategy that the 3 subgroups, for 1 zoning subgroup, 2 capacity building subgroup, and 3 housing development preservation subgroup presented at our June 9th meeting. And at that meeting, Emily Cooper gave an oral report on the ideas of the housing development and preservation subgroup. And the roadmap does list all but 2 of the housing development subgroup's recommendation that are in a report that Emily sent out this week, which I would ask her to present after we present the roadmap. And so Emily will expand on that subgroup's recommendations. So Alex, will you put the roadmap up on the screen?
Jean, I have it. I can put it up. I can share it, unless Alex, you want to.
No, I think we thought it would make sense for you to do it because you're very good at live editing.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know to the extent we'll do live editing, but I think it will be helpful. Well, first of all, I'll leave it the way it is just to give an overall explanation. But then I think we'll probably want to zero in on the first column. Otherwise, it's just not readable. But for now, just leave the whole thing there.
Can people read it, or do you want me to just focus on?
Yeah, just leave it like that because I just want to mention how it's organized. I encourage you to make note of any questions you want to ask or comments you want to make. So rather than making questions and comments as we go along, and then we'll do the questions and comments, and we can always go back to item 4, item whatever you want to make a comment or question about at the end. And that's just so we can move along quickly. This roadmap is a work in progress. It's intended to be an appendix to the housing plan that assigns responsibility for implementation and suggests timeframes as a tool for monitoring process on our housing plan over the next several years. And comments on the framework itself, as well as individual items, are welcome. And the column headings are, the first column is listing the initiative, issue, or goal. And the second column, whether the housing plan working group as a whole or one of the subgroups initiated the idea. Third, what board or officer of the town has lead responsibility for the item?
And
And for
SB is select board,
Select board.
TD is planning board, and NHT is
Needham Housing Trust.
Housing Trust.
Yeah, and there are other acronyms as we go along. And then the fourth column lists partners or advocates in our town government or our community who might support this particular item. 5 is whether town meeting action is needed for implementation. 6 is a judgment on the level of complexity. And of course, that's kind of a subjective judgment, and might end up changing that. And then 7th is prerequisites and resources needed. I must say, in my review of what Oscar did, I really focused mostly on the first column that described the item, and the subgroup column, the lead responsibility. And I didn't pay too much attention to the prerequisites or resources. Then the last column, the last column is time frame. I don't know if you can see it because it depends on where the people are shown, but it's just got words that say near term, medium term, or long term. So now let's focus on the items so that they can be readable. Items 1, 2, and 3 are really goals rather than strategies, or relate to our process. And the first one describes what our planning process is, the housing plan working group, and how we're going about it, the need for greater housing diversity. More housing options are needed to meet local needs, such as the need of, and it just ends by saying this effort should continue. And what I think is meant by this effort is comprehensive community education. Even when we finish and put out our housing plan, community education is needed in the implementation phase so that people really understand. Maybe an annual update or some kind of public meeting to keep people apprised of what progress has been made and what still needs to be done. Then number 2, we want to make sure that people do understand that our count of truly affordable housing units is really 6.7% of Needham's housing units. I think I've got that right, 6.7, which is below the idea if we had a goal of 10%, that's the 40B goal. But as we know, and we've talked about, the subsidized housing inventory includes market rate rental units. So the goal for the housing plan is to provide clear housing goals, milestones that can be tracked over the next 5 to 20 years. And it's suggested here that the Needham Housing Trust could be charged with monitoring. The Needham Housing Trust has a rather limited role to play in our town now. If you want, Karen could describe it, but this is a concept that the idea that it would be the Needham Housing Trust. When we talk about monitoring over the years, that would be the agency that of the town and the board that would do that work. Now, items 4 through 14 are really action initiatives. And all but one of them require town meeting action. Now, many of these items respond to the requirements of the MBTA Communities Law. Some may change depending on the final guidelines. But here we have the issue of options for control strategies to address the tear down trend, including that could include amending the dimensional thresholds for lot coverage, floor area ratio, setbacks. And mentioned here too is the feasibility of Needham implementing a tree removal bylaw, which to preserve the trees might have an effect on the at least the look of the final product, even if the tear downs continue. And both the development and preservation subgroup and the zoning subgroup mentioned this as a action item. And then the ADU bylaw, to broaden that bylaw, to remove, and I think we discussed this quite a bit in June 9th, to remove the family member caretaker restrictions and allow occupancies of ADUs as rental property with at least a 6-month minimum lease. So it's not like people are operating under Airbnb or something. And keeping the 850 square feet limit. So these are small units and the 1-bedroom limits for the ADUs, and presumably the parking requirement that you have to have one parking space, one additional parking space for the ADU. And the idea here is that we should consider allowing attached ADUs. That's what we allow now, attached ADUs, although they have to be lived in by the family member or caretaker. And it would require a special permit for them though, by the Zoning Board of Appeals. But the idea is consider allowing attached ADUs by right. Make sure the bylaw words it so the building inspector can decide, does what's proposed here meet our rules? And if so, issue the permit. But a new thing would be to allow detached ADUs by special permit. It could be limited to existing buildings, existing barns, existing garages, or it could allow a new accessory unit. That would be something to be discussed, a new accessory structure. So then moving on to number 6.
I have a question.
Oh, all right, sure. If it's a question for clarification, let's do it as we go along. Yeah.
Thanks. Would they still have to be within the FAR and the setbacks of the?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that what we want to do is to look at the FARs and the setbacks and then apply that to both.
That's true. I mean, if we tightened the FARs, the floor area ratio, it might make it more difficult to put on in addition and put an ADU in it. But if
We could consider that there's an incentive too. We might say that you actually get a greater FAR if you do essentially you add an ADU, or even potentially if you did a 2-family. So there's some nuances here, Rhonda, we could talk about. But
Yeah,
bottom line is you
incentives,
want
yeah.
this to all be essentially the same rules applied, but maybe we do think about ways to incentivize some of this to actually get done. And maybe there's a way we give people bonuses or something. I don't know. What would all to talk about?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then the zoning subcommittee presented quite a bit of what's in 6, 7, 8, and I think 9 at our June 9th meeting. But what we're talking about is number 6, respond to the final version of these guidelines that we're expecting soon by creating the zoning districts within a half mile of transit stations, has to have by right permitting. And if the final guidelines do still require this, the districts must include a 25-acre, I think it's 25-acre minimum contiguous site area in a total of 50 acres with minimum average density of 15 units per acre. and potential for minimum multifamily unit count. That's, in other words, this is the goal, that what we create has to have the potential for this many units. 20% of our total units of almost 12,000 units, if we're considered a bus community. How many units is that? That's about 2,400 units. These new zoned areas would have to be sufficient at a density of 15 units per acre to result in 2,400 units. I know, I think you all know that we're not under any requirement to actually permit or build those units. The developers have to come along and take advantage of the zoning that we create, that's all. But we think we're a commuter rail community. I think we really considered ourselves that. And even the wording of the original guidelines that they then said, oh, we made a mistake in wording. No, we're a commuter rail community. So that means 15% of our total, and that's 1,800 units. That's still an ambitious thing, and it requires quite a bit of rezoning. So it says 7, 8, 9, and 10 are more particular proposals for zoning changes. We're talking about Needham's Center Business and Chestnut Street Business Overlay and the Avery Square Business District, where we already allow mixed use, you know, with a multifamily on the upper floors. But we want to look at the dimensional requirements and make sure that either they presently would allow 15 units per acre or adjust them so they would. And also, although this doesn't have to do with MBTA communities, it's another thing, even if we didn't have MBTA communities challenges, we have hardly had any development in these zones under the current zoning for mixed use. And maybe if we looked at our parking limits, maybe they're too high and we don't need to require as much parking, as many parking spaces as we do. And so that's number 7. And then in general, consider adjusting parking ratios for these mixed use projects. If they're within a half mile of the transit station, then improve development opportunities for mixed use along our major corridors, Chestnut Street, Highland Avenue, Great Plain. And an idea here is, and I don't think we mentioned this before, is to incorporate density bonuses for increased affordability. So you might be able to put on another level if there were increased enforceability beyond what we usually use of the 12.5% affordable. So, one of the problems we've had is consolidating parcels to make a developable parcel, and some kind of incentives for consolidating parcels. So now number 10, rezone. Now these are areas where we're not talking about mixed use now. We're talking about rezoning targeted zoning districts or parts of zoning districts that are within a half mile of transit, including certain industrial districts, business districts. That would be like where Sudbury Farms is in the business district, and Hillside Business, another business district, to allow multifamily dwellings by right. It has to be by right to comply with MBTA. And with dimensional regulations, the same as our existing apartment 1 district, which allows 18 units per acre. So we're all set with that. That's at least 15 per acre. And we were having a problem with this 25 acre minimum. So you remember that when Oscar made the presentation, he had maps and he showed where we could do rezoning. We went all the way up Rosemary Street to the library, and then we went across to the Episcopal Church. Well, they're not likely to be developable, to be developed, but we could throw them in just to equal the 25 acres. Well, it may be the MBTA guidelines will no longer require that. So we'll have to see.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I see Rhonda has her hand up. I'm not sure if it's from before or if it's from now.
Oh,
okay.
yeah, I can't see
Me
everybody.
neither, but I was just checking right now. Okay, she said no. Okay, keep on going. Sorry,
Okay.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure that
Okay,
it's
so
hard
then,
for me to see both, but let's
so then now going beyond those ideas for rezoning. Number 11, inventory town-owned land and identify those parcels, former schools, public use parcels that could be used to build more housing, including those that might need regulatory or zoning changes to make housing possible, and identify partners who might be interested in developing them. Now, we all know about various parcels that are possibilities on that. Stephen Palmer is often mentioned. And of course, the Hillside School, despite its contamination problems, the Hillside School site is an example. Okay, and then other publicly, well, what's publicly other than the town? Well, maybe a state-owned parcel, I'm not sure if there are any, or privately owned sites, a building suitable for rezoning for multifamily. Other parcels that we haven't talked about above as apartment 1 zoning in various parts of town. I think we presented a few ideas along those lines at the January 9th meeting. And so here we get to the number 13, integrate handicapped accessibility and supportive services into new development. And mentioning programs such as those offered through the town by the Small Repair Grant Program, the Council on Aging Safety at Home Program, or through assisted living options, as well as transportation and other home maintenance programs. They exist, they should be continued. And accommodations for special needs populations should be integrated into new housing production efforts. As we have talked about, we just spent some time talking about that with the prior presentation. Number 14, consider options for strengthening Needham's inclusionary zoning bylaw, requiring all new housing or mixed-use developments of 6 or more units to provide 12.5% affordable units. That's 1 affordable per 8 units. Some of our zones that do allow housing either have a 10% requirement or no requirement. So we definitely want to make that throughout the town. But the issue is, should we be upping it? Some other communities have increased that percentage. It's a balance. It would discourage development to have it too high. So we could consider 15% and decide whether we should go there. And then consider, this idea actually came from Lee Newman originally to me, and I like it. And that's consider implementing a proportionate affordable housing fee payment to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for projects with fewer than 6 units. And that could even be a 6-unit, 5-unit single-family subdivision. If they want to put in an affordable unit, that would be great. But if they don't, they would have to pay a certain amount that's proportionate. So
that's a lot of emotion going in there, the bummer about being last, that's not my choice.
was that somebody asking a question or just some background noise? I think it was maybe background noise. Okay, so now these are further study items. It's not like I have a proposal ready to present to town meeting next year or the year after on this, but consider allowing 2 family homes by right in single family zones, both the SRB and the SRA, and how to implement it, whether as a local rezoning only near transit or more uniformly across districts, which would be more egalitarian and less site specific. Now that, I can imagine would be fairly controversial, but it's something to be considered, and especially near transit. And then consider, number 16, consider options for incentivizing higher density, smaller unit, multifamily housing choices as part of zoning reforms in other districts of the town, not related to the MBTA communities bylaw requirement. They may be outside that half a mile, for example. And then number 17, evaluate the feasibility of mixed-use development with affordable housing on the municipal parking lot in Needham Center that abuts the MBTA station platform. That lot is owned by the town. And then evaluate the feasibility of mixed-use development with affordable housing on the MBTA/municipal parking lot at Hersey Station. I think some of that property is owned by the MBTA. Then 18, support, of course, I think we're all in agreement on this, support the Needham Housing Authority initiative to upgrade all housing conditions, all of their existing housing conditions, starting with what they refer to as the MRIF. I'm afraid I don't know what that acronym means, which is underway. But it's a reorganization of their method of financing. I understand it. Consider opportunities with Needham Housing Authority properties where modernization/renovation projects produce more efficient, higher density buildings that might yield buildable lot areas for additional deeply affordable or more diverse income affordable housing, possibly through a Needham Housing Authority /developer partnership agreement. Something like that might require a zoning amendment to allow for that additional development. Then number 20, reduce or eliminate local preference in affordable housing lotteries. I read a report that was done by Newton that showed that the local preference really does make a difference in racial diversity of the applicants for these affordable housing lotteries. And we are allowed, and many communities are allowed by 40B rules to have 70% of the housing lottery. Like suppose you had a development that had 10 units, 10 affordable units, like a big apartment building like the ones we have built recently in town. 7 of those units would be in a special lottery and only local people could apply for it. That includes people who work in the town and people whose children go to school in the town too, not just people who live in the town, but that's something. All right, 21. Support, I think Oscar came up with this and his interesting thought. Support tenant advocacy and organizing efforts in affordable housing properties owned and managed by the Needham Housing Authority and other developers. If Ed Scheidler were here, he would probably confirm what I understand to be the case, that the tenant organizations in our housing authority buildings are very limited and not functioning. Then 22, explore options to establish a 40R smart growth overlay district in Needham. Now, we've never considered whether we should go with the 40R program, and I don't know if I want to take the time to go into how it basically requires by right development, which is one thing we've always avoided. We always want a special permit. Now MBTA Communities is making us do it. Well, maybe we should look at 40R. One thing it does is if the new development creates a burden on your schools, it gives you a certain amount of money per year from the state to balance that and pay for that burden. So it's something to consider. 23, conduct a racial impact study to determine whether Needham's existing residential zoning has a disproportionate impact on Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and other groups protected under the Federal Fair Housing Act. Now, of course, we just had our data through the 2020 census, and if we wanted to discuss that further, I'm sure Karen could give us some guidelines, but I'll move on to 24. And I think this is this may be something that the capacity building group mentioned at the January 9th meeting, to update our school master plan to study the impact of recent housing developments and consider the impact of proposed rezoning initiatives Thus consider the need for school building renovations or additions. I know when the Muzzy rezoning was considered and we proposed including housing in that, we found the school master plans that had been done to be very useful to determine what kind of impact there would be from housing that was only going to have 1 or 2 bedrooms, and it was quite minimal. And then 25, study capacity of town resources to address needs that may result from development arising from rezoning initiatives, including by rezoning initiatives, revising the ADU provisions, addressing MBTA communities as another new neighborhood development. And by town resources, I mean, water supply, sewage disposal, stormwater disposal, and also, because what's often mentioned, I didn't use that word here, is traffic. Study the public realm, that is streetscape improvements and transit alternatives that may be needed to handle traffic that may result from new development, and to address needs of seniors and disabled. They're really kind of 2 different subjects, but they are in number 26, and again, to study parking needs. I guess that relates to traffic too. Then this is a preservation, development, housing development and preservation subgroup. Ease zoning and permitting requirements to incentivize, maybe the phrasing is not quite right, but the idea is to either require or incentivize energy efficient and environmentally sustainable housing development. And now when we get to the next group, items 15, I mentioned that the ones we just did call for further study. Then the rest of the items are initiatives include initiatives relating to finance and funding, 29 through 43. Some relate to targeting of assistance to those with particular needs. Responsible subgroups are not listed here on this, but the general problem to be addressed is listed for some items like shortage of affordable housing, et cetera. Some of them seem to be goals rather than strategies, but I'll see if I can quickly go through them here. We're going back to 15, actually. Oh, no, excuse me. Yeah, no, I think it is 15 through 28. Could we go back to 15 so I can make sure? No, all right, I'm sorry. We already did that. So we're going down to 29 through 48.
Sorry,
Okay.
I was muted. Yeah, we already did this. We're at 29.
Through, all right. Okay, so 29, adopt the Massachusetts home law or home rule petition. And I think that state legislation has been proposed. I don't think it's been enacted yet. And it may focus on only allowing only a certain number of communities who have petitioned to do this, to enact a transfer or impact fee so that high value home sales, more than $1 million, more than 2 million, whatever you set it at, would be specially taxed to fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to help promote project feasibility of other affordable developments. Then number 30, continue to advocate for what has been done for this year and last year, the 22% commitment of Community Preservation Act funds for the creation and retention of affordable housing in Needham. 31, invest ARPA funds. Those are the federal funds that were recently made available. Community Preservation Act and other funds in capital improvements of properties owned by the Needham Housing Authority. In other words, we should support that. 32, consider waiving application fees for affordable housing projects where appropriate. 33, encourage rental development we talked about how rental development is that it has available certain state funding programs and federal funding programs such as low-income tax credits that isn't available for ownership projects. 34, make enhanced home buyer assistance available. For example, local funding to increase affordability of MHB1 mortgage loans. Karen noted that this is likely to work only for purchase of restricted affordable units because the upper limits on what the price of housing that can be purchased using these programs is such that there's a gap between the market price and Needham.
That wasn't my comment. That must have been from somebody.
Oh, okay.
You can use one mortgage program for unrestricted units.
Uh-huh. Oh,
Very
okay.
important, yeah.
Okay, so you can buy a $2 million house with it? All right,
I guess I need them,
all right.
you know.
Well, whatever, I mean, I don't mean to joke, because for young adults who are just trying to start out, who might have a good income, but who still can't afford a house in Needham where perhaps they grew up, any kind of program that can help them would be a good thing. I personally don't understand that program. I think Oscar had suggested that. And then make Community Preservation Act funds available to acquire property for group homes that serve people with disabilities. And we know that's been done in the past with CPA funds in Needham. We know we have an opportunity at Militia Way coming up, we hope, in the near future. Number 36, provide training, funding, and staff capacity to the Needham Affordable Housing Trust. And I discussed earlier the idea that they would have a special role as to implementation of monitoring of the housing plan. Not taking the lead and going to town meeting, but monitoring, making the report on how are we doing every year. Okay, now then 37, target the needs of the community's most vulnerable residents with very limited financial. This is saying we should focus on rental housing, which we discussed quite a bit at the prior presentation. And leverage other funds as state and federal resources. And this is another reason why focus on rental housing. Then invest locally available subsidy funds, CPA, Needham Affordable Housing Trust, home, in support of greater numbers. And I printed this and left out a line, but greater numbers of households every time as rentals turn over more frequently than ownership units over time. It would rental units serve a greater number of households over time as rentals turn over more regularly than ownership units. Provide opportunities for some seniors who are overhoused and spending too much money on housing to relocate to more affordable, less isolated, making their homes available to new families. 41, enhance the ability to qualified applicants for housing subsidies as state requirements for including units on the subsidized housing unit make it very difficult for long-term homeowners to be eligible for subsidized, or that is, rental units and rental developments enhance the ability to qualify applicants for subsidized, because there's, difficulty with homeowner situation. 42, provide opportunities for mixed income housing where several different income tiers can be accommodated within the same project. That's been a planning goal for a long time in general. 43, potentially develop units for those with incomes in the 80% to 100% AMI range, because that would be eligible for CPA assistance, even though it's 80 to 100%. The state law with regard to CPA allows funds to be spent for housing that's geared toward that income range. And now we get to the end here. These are simply other goals. So Improve communications and collaboration with town government boards and committees, be more proactive in addressing affordable housing needs and challenges and related impacts. Again, provide training. I realize this repetition of some things in these. 46, a suggestion to, in appointing people to town boards and committees, consider whether the person is an affordable housing advocate and wants to work on that issue. 47, expand the town's base of information about affordable units listed on the subsidized housing inventory, so people really understand what's on the inventory. Preserve, and we had a very, I mean, that's going to be part of our housing plan. And Karen already wrote that up very well, as I recall. Preserve existing parks and conservation land throughout the town and ensure their long-term accessibility to the public for recreation purposes. Now, we might also mention that for new housing developments, for the sake of the people who live there and for the sake of the neighborhood, that open space should be a feature of those developments. 49, require the installation or improvement of sidewalks, bike paths, or pedestrian trails to the nearest park or open space in locations where on-site provision of open space is not feasible. 50, consider providing additional town, and it's suggested to maybe corporate funded, and that's not an unusual suggestion. In our business district, corporations do fund internal transportation options to reduce car usage, connect to existing transit, and assist in the mobility of residents, seniors, and disabled. Now, I know there's a lot to discuss here, probably too much, really. It's like, gee, could I even remember what this was? But I also want to let Emily present the recommendations of the Housing Development Preservation Subgroup. Many of them, or actually most of them, are mentioned in the roadmap, although perhaps not with the exact wording that Emily would use. But her memo presents further details, particularly on outreach to housing developments and development agencies and agencies that create housing for adults with disabilities, and on supporting the Needham Housing Authority's initiatives. And the reason I thought we'd have Emily do the presentation before we get to discussion and questions is because it ties right in to goals, to the strategies that we were talking about. And
Jean, can I add something else just because of time? It might
Yeah.
be that the subgroups talk about this, so people can digest this, and the subgroups talk about it, and then we come back because so that it's more meaningful, because and let Emily speak. I mean, is that okay with everyone, or did anyone have anything specific that they wanted to address?
do you mean Emily should wait to speak until that?
No, Emily should speak now, but the discussion about everything we just absorbed
Oh, could
might
be.
happen in the subgroup level and then report back.
That's
and-
true. Yeah, that's
Just
that's
because
really
it's
a
a
possibility.
lot of information, I'm not sure, and it's already almost 9 o'clock.
And I did mention at the beginning of the meeting that we want a final written report from each subgroup. And we would like to get those reports by August 17th so that so that our staff can use that report in preparing the draft plan. So, Emma, all right. Well, if that suggestion is fine with me.
But I want, Emily should talk about her goals. I just wanted to make
yeah.
sure that people, you know, that the discussion on the, you know, the 50 items, I think can be done in the subgroup and then come back and talk about it at the next meeting.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we're gonna, you know.
Yeah,
just-
and it's the items at the beginning of the list are more the action items, and they're the ones that one would have more focus on. And the others are, a lot of them are more like goals or general things we should be doing in our town, you know, not that they aren't important. Okay, Emily, thank you.
Thank you. And I'm actually, you know, thank you for, you keep saying my name, but it's actually my work group. So I'm going to split this with Rhonda actually. And Rhonda's going to talk sort of the general and the tear down stuff. And then I'll go into some details with on some of the other information. So I will share my screen, Rhonda, while you're talking there.
Great, thank you.
Excellent.
So Helen, Ed, and Emily and I have met a few times. And we really wanted to just give you the quick summary with action items. And then we provided some detail about that we thought could be included for explanation, just to help out with the writing. But you know, some of these things are things we've already discussed, and a couple of them are things that we haven't already discussed. I think, you know, working with the Board of Selectmen to vote for a mission statement that supports diversity of housing, and we mean diversity in every sense of the word, in terms of, you know, social diversity, you know, so and economic diversity. So I think it would be really helpful for the plan if the selectmen had a mission statement that supported the group. We wanted to create a working group to support the housing authority. That's been talked about several times here. We don't have to dive into that any further. An inventory of public and private property that's suitable for development and for affordable or moderate. Again, that goes down, you know, Chestnut Street. There's so many different places, but the idea that if somebody comes into town and wants to build something, that there's a list of places that are appropriate, that this group would be excited to see people do some building on. Pursue the regulatory changes to the FAR, the setbacks, the height restrictions. I think that we want to talk about discouraging extraordinarily large new homes that don't fit into the existing neighborhoods, and discouraging knockdowns in order to maintain moderate income households. And so I think one of the things that came up was this idea that we want to encourage 2-family homes. And I guess my first worry about that is that the first thing that happens is you knock down a smaller home to do that. So I think we just need to be extraordinarily careful about what we're trying to incentivize. And that's why I say, I think I love the fact that the ADUs are 850 square feet. But again, I mean, I live in a neighborhood, I know a bunch of other people do, that there are 8,000 to 10,000 square foot properties. And, you know, adding 850 square feet, you're probably in your neighbor's you're in your neighbor's house to do that. So we just need to be careful of what we're incentivizing, so that we get the right things. I really think it would be exciting to work with realtors and others in town to figure out, I mean, maybe, you know, the temples, the churches, to figure out ways to encourage buyers to offer smaller homes to sellers, to offer smaller homes to buyers rather than to contractors, and to figure out a way to maybe have the realtors reduce their fees or something on a smaller house. I mean, I just think it's a win-win, and I think we just need to think, I mean, realtors don't make any money when it gets sold to a contractor at all. They usually lose those sales. So we should get together and brainstorm, I would think. Meet with the Historic Society to figure out whether or not we want a historic district. If we want to make sure, I mean, you know, currently I think a lot of historic structures don't get knocked down, but we want to maintain, as things get older and older, we want to make sure that we're doing, the plan helps us maintain the historic integrity of the town. And I just think, you know, it's an amazing history, and we should just make sure we do what we can. And I think the Historic Society might have some ideas about how we could do that. We talked about sponsoring a gathering of developers. Emily will go more into details with that. Where am I? Sorry, you just went up, and so we want to make sure that we're building to zero net energy, or nearly zero net energy. I only added near zero net energy just in case there was some reason that you couldn't fully, I mean, sometimes if it's too shady an area, you can't get any PV on the roof that's going to be effective, and therefore you might not be able to meet those kinds of energy standards just with building standards. So we just want to make sure that we're flexible for that. review the housing models, make sure we're addressing adults with disabilities and seniors. That Jean went into that in pretty much detail. So, you know, yes, a lot of this stuff, the housing models for the special ed, that was also discussed. I think we wanted to, and Ed had looked into this and has more details, but assign a working group to look at the potential for the Stevens Palmer building and not wait until it's being transferred to the town. We should probably take a look at that sooner than later and know what we want, what the plan is, and work with the existing owner to make sure that it's a good transfer and that the people that are living there are taken care of. And that we don't do something that's going to upset their apple cart. I think it's affordable housing and people are living there. We just need to be careful. Include any new housing. The housing overlay requirements of have some level of affordability. I know that it was sent out that the Board of Selectmen is considering taking a cash payment from the Carter site, and we just need to be really, really careful about understanding how incredibly high costs are right now. And one of the comments was that assisted living is really hard to subsidize. Well, that's the beauty of having a developer providing the affordability, because then the town doesn't have to come up with anything and doesn't have to help subsidize it. So I think that the more we require developers to create the level of affordability, the more affordability the town is going to get. When we take cash payments, the idea that we're going to lose out on potentially 9 assisted living units that are clearly much needed based on all of the work that Karen's done, we should be very cognizant of what we're trading. Look specifically at the Chestnut Street area between the town center and the Junction train station for some affordable, that was already mentioned as well. So some of it is, there's some overlap in the things that we've looked at, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity in the town, and we just wanted to make sure that we also provided some detail, and I went into some history with some blanks in it that are in the edition, and Emily's going to go into some of the details of things that she worked on.
Thanks, Rhonda, and Ed and Helen, please chime in. And I'm like Jean, I'm kind of going to run this through, and then maybe you guys can look at it in your subgroups. It's also, what's nice is when you do a plan well, you all start coming to the same conclusions. So you'll see much of this is also things that Jean already mentioned. An inventory of public and privately owned land. We gave an example of one of them that Newton has done, where they've really assessed every property, including things that are privately owned that are, parking lots, for example. We talked about sponsoring a meeting with housing development agencies that do affordable housing to gather feedback about why not Needham or why Needham. We gave a list of a variety of housing developers that have properties in Sudbury, in Framingham, in Canton, in many of the communities around here, including high cost areas, and sort of hear from them what would attract them to come, to Needham, or what is keeping them away from Needham. I think we want to do something similar, and we can talk, it's farther below, about specialized housing for adults with disabilities. Rhonda mentioned the select board and the affordable, and if we can have a working meeting on the Stephen Palmer site. We really need an assessment done. We need to know what the rents are being charged currently, what the income of the current residents are, what the building looks like. Are there infrastructure needs? Are there improvement needs? Is it walk-in ready? Is there ability to support additional density? To your question, Natasha, earlier, about can we put more density there? Or is this going to be like a total gut rehab or tear down? And then I think, the question of whether or not we can say moving forward, we want to create this as something that's affordable housing that could be on the SHI while not requiring the residents to give up their home. Could we add more units, make it a nice place to live? I think we really need somebody to come in and do an actual assessment of the building itself. I know I saw that Reg Foster's on the call. So Reg, if perk up your ears, we're talking about the Needham Housing Authority. We want to make sure that, you know, we've heard from existing residents. We want to make sure that there's a real clear process for community and resident input into whatever's happening at the Needham Housing Authority. We're pretty specific here. Really, that any housing created through any of this be affordable to people at incomes of 60% of area median or lower. Needham Housing Authority, as a housing authority, is mission driven and is really the agency for meeting the needs of people who are extremely low income or very low income. We also want to see that we don't that when if you add density to any of the existing housing, so for example at Linden Street, there 13% of those units by law are for people who are younger and disabled. So if you're going to add more housing, they were going to add 32 more units. We'd want to see the same proportion, right? So you don't want to just only add and then you're going in one direction. We want to make sure that any rehab of existing housing maintains the same proportion of units for older adults and for younger people with disabilities, because we think it's equally as needed. For the new housing that is being considered to be created, we are recommending that it be for older adults and be age restricted, given the numbers that we saw today. That probably, you know, is not, it matches with the unmet need. We also would recommend that it be for people making it no more than 60% of the area median income, which means you need to leverage federal, state, and local resources. And we want to also flag that there are a lot of public-private partnerships going on with housing authorities right now. For example, Harbor Light Community Partners, Inc., which is a nonprofit housing developer, and the Ipswich Housing Authority have entered into a joint venture. So there are a fair amount of nonprofit affordable housing developers that are partnering with housing authorities and bringing to that venture just more experience in developing housing. There's been some really nice partnerships, and I want to make sure that is still, that's something that's being considered. These are not people who are trying to make a buck or trying to, you know, make money off the deal. These are mission-driven agencies. I also think it's important that if there's a senior housing, that there's service enriched, that you're looking at other models that exist. So for example, there is, again, in Harbor Light House is a low-income housing tax credit building that is targeted to people who are on Element Care PACE. PACE stands for the Program of All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly. It's for people 55 and older, and it provides every service you might need to keep you out of a nursing home, except for paying your rent. So it can't be used to pay rent. But you'll see there's another PACE partnership going on in Brighton. There's one here in Fitchburg. So looking at Jack Satter House and Revere, which is Humor Senior Life, these are all affordable senior housing properties that are designed to be tied to a very intensive service model so that they basically mimic assisted living, but are not zoned nor regulated as such. But they're service enriched and would allow people at lower incomes to stay where they want, live where they want, and get the services they need and not have to leave. And I provided another one. Looking at the adults with disabilities and Needham seniors, and again, Helen, Ed, chime in. I'm just sort of reading through. I think we also have to make sure our zoning, or if we need to encourage people to come and get a special permit to allow multiple people to live together in one house who are unrelated, and make sure that that's not going to show up as a rooming house or have any issues, and maybe even encourage people to be doing that, to create sort of a group living environment. Look at some of the ideas that CPAC provided around, and sponsor a panel presentation from providers in other communities who have other models. So Specialized Housing, Inc., which has multiple houses in Brookline, Cape Cod Village in Orleans, Forward at the Rock and Dennis, Smock Housing. They've all done group housing for people with disabilities, adults with disabilities, particularly people with developmental or intellectual disabilities or autism spectrum disorder. That might be, we'd love to hear from them. What would you need to do something like that in Needham? Or, what's keeping you from doing it in Needham? I think I'll commit to making and maintaining as inclusive and supportive community for people with disabilities. And then we really encourage anything that comes out of the transit-oriented development to include some level of affordability that would be on the SHI. Now, it doesn't sound like the state is going to require that. And so that would have to be something that we would have to do. I'm done, but I didn't know, Rhonda, did you want to say anything more about the FAR?
Well, I mean, I think we want to make sure we want to look at, you know, I think we want to spend some time looking at FARs on you know, because all of the buildings that are coming up are just way too big. Anything that's getting torn down, all the houses that are getting constructed are just filling the entire site that they're on. And they're really tall as well, which I'm sort of surprised by. So that's just a question of whether or not that's something that people are interested in. I mean, that's a concern of mine, and I think of some of the people in our group, but I think, you know, that it's a very tough question because people are very concerned about the valuations of their homes. And that has a huge impact on it. But the buildings, the houses that are getting knocked down are the moderate. Some of them are well past usage. You know, they're tiny. There's probably not a lot of demand for them if there are, you know, 800 or 900 square foot cottages that are getting knocked down. But there are plenty of 15, 17, 1800 square foot homes that are starter homes for young families that are getting knocked down, and then, you know, 4,500 square foot, 5,000 square foot houses that are $1.5 million to $2 million are getting built. And the question is, does our group want to say anything about that?
And Rhonda, I have to say that's not just cottages. One of my friends is a developer, and they said we have like a 2,800 square foot home, and they said that but because we have a 1 acre lot, that it's most likely a tear down. So I think it's not even like 1.5 to $2 million. Now it's in the 4 to 5 million because the land is so expensive, right? So now the average house is 1.2. So you have to, you know, in order for you to be able to develop it, it has to be a certain size. And so,
yeah, and we just have to, you know, as a group, I don't think this is a one person. I think we all have to talk about it and decide, you know, whether or not. I think that there's so many different parts of it. I mean, I think it's sad because these houses are starter homes and they're the houses that people could move into. I mean, granted, they're probably $800 to $1 million houses, but that is almost moderate in the world that we're living in, which is scary but true. And you know, two people in their late 20s, early 30s, probably with some help and a down payment, they can afford to live in those houses. And those houses are coming down, and the houses that are getting built, they can't afford. And I just think it's going to change the diversity, one segment of the diversity of the town, but it also changes the dynamics of the neighborhood that it happens in. So it's a question of whether or not other people find it to be disturbing.
Rhonda, I just wanted to throw something out from my experience. Must be 5 or 6 years ago that a committee was formed to address the tear downs. The Large House Committee, it was called. And we tried to include, you know, the people who would be affected. A lot of the initiative came from the Council on Aging and the Health Department and the Board of Health Ed. You may remember this, that they really took the lead in talking, I'm getting this mixed up with the accessory dwelling units. It was the Board of Health and the Council on Aging with the accessory dwelling units. But the focus on the large houses and the tear downs was coming from the way people in our town are very upset about this and the impact that these large houses have on their neighbors and on their neighborhood. So we had this committee, and it included developers, architects, real estate agents, and people from the community. What we came up with, because it was quite a compromise, as you can imagine, were changes that we hoped would incentivize a better design of the building. that would encourage porches, that would encourage bay windows, so that you didn't just have this wall. And I think the setbacks were adjusted very slightly, but mostly adjusted so that you could still go out to the old setback with your bay window or your porch. Now, after we had that in effect, I met with Karen, as she may remember this because she helped me create a list of all the tear down developments that occurred in the year before this was even, thought to go before town meeting. And then all the tear downs that occurred in the year after it went into effect. So I had the list, but what happened then? We had COVID. I
Yeah.
couldn't go up to the town engineer's office and work with them to look at the plans. I set it aside. But what I mean is, we were talking earlier when we were talking about the roadmap about monitoring. Whenever you make a change and you think that change is going to have a good effect, you have to study it. What has the outcome been? What happened with this change? And to study that would inform any new initiatives. You say, look, we made some changes, but did they have an effect? Maybe they had some effect.
Right.
Maybe they had no effect, really. I think they did not have any effect on the number of teardowns, and that was deliberate because those developers and real estate agents, they didn't want to reduce the number of teardowns, but we at least wanted to make them look better. So that's all I'll say about that. But I think it should be studied again. It's a difficult issue. There are lots of sides, and I'm glad you're recommending it, and we'll really take it
Thank you. That's
seriously.
a very interesting history. Thank you.
Yeah. As we discussed earlier, it is late, and each group. The only thing I'm a little concerned about is that maybe there are questions for clarification or something like that we should deal with. Is there anything that, as we went along, somebody really said, I really have to ask that question? Okay, but Emily, you did have your hand up there.
My question is more about, it's 9/20 and August 17th. We're not going to meet between now and then. We're going to meet in September, and there's some deliverable due, and I'm not quite sure I know what is supposed to be in that deliverable, and what, is there a template coming out? So the subgroup reports, like, what is that? And I guess it would really help, and I'm going to be on vacation. Other people are going to probably be on vacation.
Yeah,
so
me too.
It would be helpful, like, if you gave us even just a format so that we could all give you the same thing back.
Karen, could you respond to that as to what would be most helpful in leading up to the draft plan as far as reports from each of the subcommittees?
Well, if any of the subgroups have any comments about the actions included in the roadmap that they would like to kind of get any questions about it, or would like to call it to our attention, make some comments, that would be helpful, as well as if, based on the actions that would be related to your subgroup, if you wanted to flesh out any of the actions for consideration in the housing plan, that would be helpful as well. Now, I mean, we set that date. I didn't see the report from the development subgroup until after we had kind of rescheduled and had this August date. I think we're just looking for the subgroups to meet again, to respond to what's included in the roadmap, provide some, questions, comments, suggestions, and if there is an interest in fleshing anything more out about the actions including that relate to their subgroup, all of that should be submitted to us by August 17th.
And Karen, have you had an opportunity? I know you heard it presented tonight, but the Housing Development and Preservation Subgroup have come up with these
I saw it.
list of action recommendations.
Yes, I saw that. And they went in more detail than they did before. And I think we were hoping to have something like that. That was all very helpful. But when we were having our pre-meeting, I hadn't seen it, but I did
Yes.
see it.
Right, but what I guess the part of the question is, you might consider this the final report of that.
Yeah. That would be fine.
And
If there's anything
yeah.
else, any of the subgroups want to add or have questions about
is
the
the time to
roadmap,
do
we
it.
need it by August 17th.
And the
Okay.
reason is because Karen has to be able to incorporate it all for the September meeting. So,
We thought it was due today.
well, now you're ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Jean, I
Well,
apologize. I have
and-
to run. I'm not sure if you need me to end the meeting, but
No, the next steps would be presented by Lee Newman. I know that the zoning subgroup has work cut out for it, and we may have to respond very quickly to any changes in the MBTA communities. So we'll have to work out, Heidi and Oscar and I, how we produce a report by August 17th under the circumstances, but we'll do our best. Okay, and actually, I know that the other group, the capacities group, did have a written report on June 9th. So that report, Michael, that could be, you could look back at that, see if you want to add anything to it. And also, it really would be helpful to take a look at the roadmap. I know it contains a lot of things that might not be relevant to your work, but to the extent it does contain items that are relevant to your work, do you agree with the way it's worded? Do you want to add anything, that sort of thing?
Are the
The hope,
comments?
yeah, the
comments
hope
for
is that the roadmap,
Sorry.
yeah, the hope is that the roadmap actually encompasses all of the subgroup information. As you could see, there's a lot of overlap. We were trying to capture whatever text we had from all the subgroups or paraphrase it as best we could. So that is the goal, that everything should be in the roadmap that we want to address.
Yeah.
In some form.
And
So
I
that
did-
it's the summary
And are
document
the
of,
comments on the roadmap also due by August 17th, or are they due sooner or later?
No later than the 17th. Sooner is better, but no later than the 17th.
Okay, and then we have one other date we need to discuss. And I think Natasha Spado, who had to leave us, I know that she's good with the final meeting date of November 17th. We'd like to be able to set that as that's the day for our November meeting. Does that create a problem for anybody? It looks like everybody's good with that. Great. Okay, so is there anything else you want to, do you want to go over the next couple of meetings and how we've got it on the schedule of what we're going to do, Lee? Just to-
Sure. So I think everybody has the August 17th date burned into their memory. So the meeting on September the 8th, provided that the MBTA guidelines are out, the meeting is going to be focused on a review of those guidelines and what the committee's recommendations look like in terms of being responsive to those guidelines, as well as a review of the subgroups, priorities, and strategies as modified in the implementation work roadmap that we just discussed. And then the meeting on September 29th, Karen hopes to have the draft housing plan done for your review and your comments in preparation for a community meeting, which we're now going to move forward to October the 13th. And then following that meeting, this group will again meet and being responsive to what we're here at that community meeting, decide on any modifications we want to make to the draft housing plan before we finalize it.
Mhm. Okay, thank you, Lee. I had asked Alex before we actually began the meeting a new zoning map has been created for the town. And it was, copies were sent to planning board members. I was very glad to get the new zoning map. And Alex said she can have zoning maps printed for everybody in our committee who wants one. Thumbs up if you want one. Okay, Oscar, Ed, Heidi, Rhonda, and Michael. Okay. Did you get that, Alex? Is Alex still with us?
I got Oscar, Heidi, Ed, Mike, Rhonda. Did I miss anyone?
Okay, good.
All right, I'll
Yeah,
mail them to you.
And
And
then
if
do you have,
anybody decides that you want, just, it's not like a deadline. Just
Thank you.
make it.
dig-
Change your
digitally,
mind.
yeah, thank
email
you.
Alex.
And Alex, digitally is great because I'm gonna swap I'm gonna transpose all the diagrams that we did on the old map and bring it into the new map.
Sure. Well, the PDF is online on the
Yeah, I can just-
website.
Yeah, I'll just do that.
Okay, so
That's
I'll
fine.
just take the PDF online too.
Yeah.
It's just so you know, though, it is very hard to read it. Like, there's just a lot of little. Those who said they want a map, I'm still sending you a map because it is hard to read.
Oh, it's
online.
hard, yeah.
It's hard to read online.
It's
The only,
dense.
the only change, is this correct, Alice? The only change is the rezoning of the Muzzy site to the new,
And also the Avery Square, I
Overlay.
forget if it was an overlay or I
yeah,
think it
the
was not an
overlay, the overlay for the Carter building. Yes.
And they got the
Oh,
scale
it wasn't
fixed.
overlay, okay.
They got the scale fixed, yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, the bar scale is incorrect. And I didn't realize that until I actually made it incorrectly and then looked at it and went, oh, that's not right. I'll talk to you offline, Alex.
Yeah, but please do. Please.
Tomorrow. I'll show you what I'm
Yeah,
talking about.
Let me know, because, thank you.
Okay, so now to be formal about it, well, I should ask, is there any other business that any other member wishes to raise or ask about? All right, then we need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second. Third.
Okay, roll call vote on the motion to adjourn. Helen, Gregory,
Yes.
Oscar Mertz,
Yes.
Michael O'Brien,
Yes.
Ed Cosgrove,
Yes.
Emily Cooper,
Yes.
Heidi Frail,
Yes.
Rhonda Spector.
Yes,
All right, we stand adjourned. Jean McKnight, yes.
thank you.
Who seconded?
Good night, everyone.
We both Oscar and I did.
Night.
It was
Your
good.
choice, Karen.
Rhonda has it. Okay, bye.
Good
Yeah.
night.
All right.